Marcus Hale had always believed that the deepest betrayals were the ones that arrived quietly, disguised as ordinary moments, and on a rain-soaked Thursday evening in Chicago. His entire world unraveled with the click of a single video file on his wife's tablet, a device he had rarely touched but picked up only because the kitchen drawer where it usually sat had been left open, and he, being the meticulous, order-obsessed systems analyst that he was, simply intended to put it back. But curiosity flared when he saw a thumbnail showing the familiar burgundy hallway rug of their home, the one his wife Lila insisted on buying from the overpriced boutique downtown. And before his conscience could intervene, his thumb tapped the screen, unleashing a shaky recording that began with raised voices, Lila's unmistakable tone sharp with frustration as she argued with someone just outside the frame, accusing him of being late every damn time. And then, as the FedEx uniform stepped into view, broad shoulders, weathered face, and unsettling confidence, Marcus felt his stomach knot as Lila's voice cracked, her anger melting into something vulnerable, something unfamiliar. And within seconds, the argument dissolved, the man pulling her close, her resistance collapsing like wet paper. And Marcus watched with a hollow, icy stillness as his wife, his partner of 8 years, the woman he once believed incapable of such recklessness, gave herself to a stranger against the very wall they had painted together, her soft gasps echoing through the microphone like a cruel symphony, each sound carving deeper into him until he could no longer feel his own breathing. He paused the video halfway, unable to continue, yet unable to stop trembling, his mind spinning with memories their anniversary trip to Seattle, where she cried during the sunset and told him she felt safe with him, the nights she claimed she was working late, the sudden new dresses that she said were on sale, and he wondered how long he had been living beside a stranger, how many signs he had missed while drowning in spreadsheets and deadlines. And in that moment, rage didn't come. Instead, a terrifying sense of analytical detachment settled over him, some buried part of his mind clicking into place like a lock turning, as though a quiet, calculating version of himself had been waiting for years to be summoned. He replayed the last 10 seconds of the video, focusing not on Lila, but on the delivery guy, his face, the tattoo curling from his collar, the badge number partially visible on his uniform. And Marcus felt something ignite, not an emotional fire, but a methodical one, the kind used by men who solve problems by breaking them into pieces. He transferred the video to his laptop, enhanced the audio with software he used for work, and zoomed into every frame, dissecting the man's features until patterns emerged, until he could almost hear the gears in his mind grinding out a roadmap. And then his thoughts drifted to Lila, who was currently at a charity dinner claiming she'd be home late, and he imagined her sitting under dim chandeliers, smiling the same smile she had given the delivery man hours or days before, and something inside him shifted, the beginning of a cold, dangerous resolve forming like frost on glass. He didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't smash anything. Instead, he stood up slowly, placed the tablet neatly back into the drawer, and walked to his office, where he opened a hidden folder on his computer titled Contingencies, a private vault of tools and research he had gathered over the years for cybersecurity threats. Though some files, specifically the ones related to digital tracking and identity tracing, could just as easily be used for other purposes. And as he began typing the FedEx man's tattoo description into a search program he wasn't exactly authorized to use, Marcus realized that this wasn't about heartbreak anymore. This was about violation, humiliation, and the irreversible crossing of a line that no apology could ever erase. And in the icy stillness of that quiet office, illuminated only by the cold blue glow of his monitors, Marcus Hale made a silent, calculated vow. He was going to find the man in the video, every detail, every connection, every weakness, and when he finally looked him in the eyes, the delivery guy would know exactly what it felt like to lose everything. Marcus barely slept that night. Instead, he sat in the dark living room with only the faint orange glow of a street lamp leaking through the blinds, his mind turning with mechanical precision as he traced every possible lead connected to the delivery man in the video, a man whose badge number, once enhanced and isolated, gave him just enough information to pull employee rosters from a rarely accessed FedEx internal directory he had breached through a loophole months ago while testing cybersecurity vulnerabilities. And as he compared the tattoo glimpsed in the video with social media profiles scraped via his customized search tools, the puzzle pieces slid into place. 34. Former amateur boxer, previous misdemeanor for bar assault, lived in a rundown apartment on West Huron, drove a motorcycle registered under his cousin's name, and carried a reputation for having affairs with clients on his route, which lit a spark of icy rage in Marcus. Not because Evan had seduced Leela specifically, but because it suggested a pattern, a casual disregard for boundaries that made the betrayal feel less personal, yet more insulting, as though Marcus's marriage had been just another box on Evan's daily list. But while his fingers flew across the keyboard, Marcus couldn't stop replaying the moment from earlier that evening when Lila had walked through the door at 11:13 p.m., still smelling faintly of wine from the charity event, completely unaware that her entire deception had collapsed hours earlier. And when she casually kissed his cheek and asked why he was still awake, Marcus simply said he was finishing a project, his voice steady, his expression unreadable even though a storm churned inside him. A storm she didn't notice because she didn't look closely enough. Or maybe because she had already grown comfortable with lying. And that realization cut Marcus deeper than the video itself. Now, as dawn crept over the skyline, he unlocked a silver case he hadn't touched in years. One that contained an old identity tracing kit from his brief but intense stint consulting for a private investigation firm before settling into the stability of corporate cybersecurity. And he methodically packed a burner phone, a miniature GPS tracker, a compact camera, and a notebook he labeled only with the date. These weren't tools of revenge, he told himself, but instruments of clarity. Because before he confronted anyone, he needed the full truth, every detail, every timeline, every interaction between Evan and Lila. Whether the betrayal had been a single catastrophic lapse or a long-running deception masked beneath domestic routines and affectionate gestures. He left the house early, before Lila woke up, telling her through a text message that he had an early meeting downtown. And as he drove out of the neighborhood, he replayed her earlier attempt at casual conversation, noticing how she hadn't asked him any meaningful questions, hadn't sensed anything off, hadn't even looked guilty details that suggested to Marcus's sharpened mind that she wasn't afraid of being discovered. Possibly because she thought the secret was safely buried, or worse, because she believed Marcus was too distracted, too trusting, too predictable to ever uncover it. The thought made his jaw tighten as he pulled into a diner parking lot near Evan's apartment, where he positioned his car in a discreet corner and watched the building entrance through the camera mounted behind his tinted window. And after nearly an hour of stillness, Evan emerged, broad-shouldered, wearing the same uniform jacket seen in the video, carrying a duffel bag, looking like a man who moved through life with reckless confidence, unaware that someone had begun dissecting his existence, piece by piece. Marcus followed at a distance as Evan rode off on his motorcycle to the regional FedEx facility, entering through the employee gate without hesitation, and Marcus parked across the street, noting times, patterns, and behaviors with the same precision he used when mapping sites, realizing with chilling clarity that surveillance came naturally to him, that some dormant part of his personality had awakened and felt disturbingly calm in its purpose. When Evan finally left the facility, hours later, and stopped at a small corner store, Marcus watched him flirt casually with the cashier, confirming the man's pattern of boundaryless behavior. And in that moment, Marcus's anger sharpened, not the wild kind that led to reckless decisions, but a cold, methodical focus born from truth revealed layer by layer. And as Evan drove off again, Marcus whispered to himself, not in rage, but in quiet calculation, I will know everything, every lie, every moment, because only then, he believed, could he decide what justice would look like. Marcus spent the next morning dissecting every movement Evan had made the previous day, building a meticulous behavioral map while sitting in his office, where the curtains remained half-closed and the hum of his computer filled the air like a patient heartbeat. Yet, even as he pursued the man who had violated his marriage, Marcus couldn't ignore the growing suspicion that Leela's betrayal might run deeper than a moment of weakness captured on a tablet. The thought stalked him through the hours like a shadow that refused to detach. And around noon, he finally confronted the idea he had been resisting since he first watched the video. If Lila had done this once, she might have done it before, and if Evan was bold enough to engage with her in their home, then perhaps the affair had been going on longer than the 24-minute clip implied. A realization that spurred Marcus to open the home security archives he had silently synced to his cloud months earlier during a software update, a backup he never intended to use but now scrolled through with the calm precision of a surgeon searching for tumors. He watched motion alerts from random evenings, his eyes narrowing whenever he saw Lila returning home later than she claimed, or when she lingered near the front door as if waiting for something or someone before re-entering the house. And though none of the clips showed Evan directly, Marcus noticed subtle inconsistencies that formed a pattern. Leela checking her reflection too carefully on nights she said she was exhausted. Her sudden insistence on taking afternoon walks alone. Deleted call logs on days she claimed her phone had glitched, and these fragments, individually small, collectively pointed toward a timeline that chilled him because it meant the betrayal could be weeks or even months old, a possibility that snapped something inside him, not loudly but cleanly, like a string pulled too tight, finally giving way. It wasn't enough anymore to track Evan, he had to track Lila too. not out of spite, but out of necessity, because knowing the truth mattered more than the pain it caused. And so he placed a tiny GPS tracker beneath her car bumper early that afternoon, under the pretense of getting something from the garage. And by the time she left the house for a grocery run, Marcus had her movements displayed on a secondary screen beside his desk. Watching the small, blinking icon travel in an oddly indirect route to a part of the city she rarely visited, a neighborhood filled with old, narrow streets and brick buildings that stood like worn-out witnesses to countless quiet secrets. Marcus's pulse slowed as he watched her car stop near an unremarkable cafe, and instead of driving there physically, he hacked into a nearby security camera using an exposed IP port left unsecured by the business's aging infrastructure. A simple infiltration that took him less than 3 minutes. And when the camera feed appeared on his monitor, he saw Lila sitting at an outdoor table knot, looking rushed, not looking stressed, but looking vibrant, leaning forward in quiet but animated conversation with a man who was definitely not Evan, a lean, polished-looking stranger, wearing a charcoal blazer and an expression too relaxed for a casual encounter. And as Marcus zoomed the feed, he noticed the subtle way Lila's fingers touched her hair, the way she smiled with a softness she hadn't shown Marcus in years, the way her shoulders relaxed as though she felt safe with this stranger, and the sight sent a cold, disorienting wave through Marcus's chest, because it revealed something worse than infidelity, revealed comfort, familiarity, intimacy. This wasn't an impulsive mistake or a reckless fling with a delivery guy. This was something practiced, deliberate, possibly ongoing. And Marcus felt his hands go still on the keyboard as clarity dawned. Lila wasn't just hiding an affair. She was hiding multiple layers of deception. A double life built with the ease of someone who had grown confident in her own lies, someone who believed herself too clever to be caught. And as the man across from her reached out to touch her hand, Marcus inhaled slowly, steadying himself, not with anger, but with calculation, because whatever he had believed about his marriage had now dissolved into something darker and far more intricate. He saved the footage, logged the timestamps, traced the cafe's reservations to identify the man whose name appeared as Adrian Lockhand, began building a second behavioral profile, realizing that he was no longer dealing with a single betrayal, but a branching network of secrets, each one requiring the same meticulous attention he had once reserved for hunting sites. And as Lila eventually returned home later that evening with a grocery bag she had obviously purchased only to maintain the lie, Marcus greeted her with the same calm, unreadable expression he had perfected over the last 48 hours, silently promising himself that he would uncover every truth she had buried, no matter how deep he had to dig or how dark the path became. Marcus woke before sunrise with a clarity that felt almost unnatural, as though his mind had already been working while his body rested, assembling timelines, cross-referencing behaviors, and stitching together the lies Lila had woven into their life. And as he sat at the edge of the bed watching her sleep peacefully beside him, he wondered how many mornings like this had passed while she carried hidden worlds behind her closed eyelids, unaware that he now stood just outside those secret doors. He moved quietly into his office, powered up his system, and opened the surveillance feed he had saved the previous night. pausing on the frame where Adrian Locke's hand reached across the cafe table to touch light. The gesture, subtle yet undeniably intimate, the kind of touch that carried history, and Marcus studied the man's face, analyzing the confidence in his posture, the slow, deliberate smile that suggested familiarity rather than flirtation. And with each passing second, Marcus felt a growing sense that Adrian was not just another betrayal, he was the core, the anchor around which Leela's hidden life revolved. Driven by the same methodical instinct that made him exceptional in cybersecurity, Marcus began tracing Adrian's digital footprint, discovering that he ran a small real estate consulting firm downtown, had no criminal record, lived in a minimalist condo overlooking the river, and maintained a social media presence carefully curated to appear ordinary. Yet Marcus detected the subtle signs of someone accustomed to discretion: sparse personal posts, travel photos with no companions, and a consistent avoidance of all of which suggested a man with something to protect. As Marcus dug deeper, he found encrypted email exchanges between Adrian and a private address that matched the naming format, sometimes used for disposable accounts. Discovery that made Marcus's chest tighten as he realized they weren't just meeting casually. They were communicating regularly and possibly planning something larger than a illicit rendezvous. The thought made Marcus's hands still on the keyboard as a deeper truth settled in. He wasn't just dealing with infidelity. He was dealing with a conspiracy of intimacy, a constructed world designed to keep him blind. And he knew that uncovering the full scope of it required more than digital investigation. It required physical observation. So later that morning, after Leela left for her weekly yoga class, Marcus followed her route from a distance, noting how her patterns had initially seemed so normal, yet now looked like maneuvers meant to disguise intentions. She drove directly to the studio, but lingered in her car for nearly 10 minutes before entering, glancing at her phone repeatedly with an anxiousness that betrayed the calm persona she projected. And Marcus monitored her movements using both the tracker and the studio's front entrance camera he accessed through an unsecured network port, finding that she stayed only 15 minutes before slipping out the back exits, something that tightened his focus and confirmed she had engineered a cover routine, one that relied on time gaps and predictable visibility. She drove to a residential street lined with small, well-kept houses, parking in front of a property with a blue door. And Marcus watched from 2 blocks away through a telephoto lens as she knocked twice before Adrian opened the door, letting her in with the same ease and familiarity he had shown at the cafe, his hand brushing her lower back in a gesture that seemed both protective and proprietary. And Marcus felt a coldness wash over him, not because of the betrayal itself, but because of how practiced their movements were, how synchronized, how rehearsed, as though they were 2 actors stepping into roles they knew by heart. He recorded every second, documenting times, gestures, and entry duration, and when Lila finally emerged an hour later, her hair slightly disheveled and her expression softened in a way Marcus had not seen directed at him in years, she paused before getting into her car, placing a hand on her chest as if steadying herself, and whispered something that the camera couldn't capture, but the intimacy of the moment made clear. It was an emotional release, the kind lovers exhale only when leaving someone who matters deeply. Marcus stayed frozen behind the wheel, absorbing the shift in his understanding. This wasn't a fling. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't something that could be explained or forgiven. This was a life she had chosen and built with someone else. A life in which Marcus existed only as an obstacle or a placeholder. Yet instead of breaking him, the revelation sharpened him, crystallizing a precise, unwavering purpose. Because now it wasn't about anger or pain, it was about truth, control, and the unraveling of a hidden architecture Lila believed was impenetrable. And as Marcus drove away, he whispered into the still air of his car, "If you have built a world without me, I will dismantle it, piece by piece." The words, steady, quiet, almost gentle, yet carrying all the weight of a man who had crossed the threshold from wounded husband to silent predator of secrets. Marcus spent the following 48 hours constructing a dual-layered strategy designed not only to uncover the entirety of Lila and Adrian's hidden relationship, but to expose the structural weaknesses of the world they had built behind his back. And as he sat in his office, surrounded by glowing monitors, each screen displaying separate streams of data, GPS logs, security feeds, phone metadata, and traced correspondences, he felt an eerie sense of calm settle over him. The kind that came only when every emotion had been burned away and replaced with pure purpose. He began by infiltrating Adrian's consulting firm through a dormant backdoor vulnerability he found in their outdated server, allowing him to siphon internal emails, financial records, and client lists without leaving a trace. But what caught his attention wasn't business. It was a series of encrypted messages between Adrian and Anne, anonymous account that Marcus recognized instantly as Lila's, based on timing patterns and linguistic rhythms that mirrored her writing style. And within those encrypted threads, he found hints of meetings, veiled references to plans and transitions, and even a few emotionally charged lines that suggested an emotional bond deeper than anything she had shown Marcus in years. Lines like, "I can't live in half-truths forever," and "soon, I promise," both time-stamped during evenings she had told Marcus she was overwhelmed with work. Yet it wasn't until Marcus uncovered a string of financial transactions, small amounts sent every few days from Lila to a shared digital wallet, that he realized her betrayal extended beyond emotion or intimacy. Because the wallet appeared to be connected to a property investment Adrian was trying to secure. Meaning Lila was not only emotionally tied to this man, she was helping fund pieces of his future, quietly diverting parts of their shared income toward a life Marcus wasn't meant to be part of. A realization that settled in Marcus's chest like a stone. Still, he didn't lash out, didn't confront her, didn't slip even once in his outward persona. Instead, he deepened his surveillance, installing a silent screen mirroring demon on Lila's phone, using a vulnerability she unknowingly triggered when she clicked on a fake email Marcus crafted to resemble a yoga studio promotion. And as he watched her messages populate onto his screen in real time that evening, he saw her texting Adrian with a tenderness that made Marcus feel both nauseated and electrified. Lines like, "Today was risky, but I needed to see you," followed by Adrian's reassuring response, "Soon it won't have to be risky at all." A line that made Marcus pause, leaning back slowly as he considered the implications. Were they planning to leave him? Move in together? Start a new life, while discarding him like a used shell. The question pulsed in his skull as he watched Leela walk into the kitchen moments later, calm, composed, humming softly as she reheated leftovers, completely unaware that Marcus was monitoring her phone from the office upstairs, completely unaware that every private whisper she sent to her lover was now part of a growing archive Marcus was building with ruthless precision. Later that night, after she fell asleep, he quietly went to the garage and planted a second tracker inside her handbag lining, a failsafe in case she ever switched vehicles or attempted to conceal her movements more deliberately. And by the next morning, Marcus had compiled a full behavioral network chart linking Leela, Adrian, and even Evan the delivery man, realizing with a jolt that Evan had only appeared in one video but was not mentioned anywhere else. Not in messages, not in audio logs, not in transactional traces, which made Marcus wonder whether Evan had been nothing but a momentary distraction for Lila, a reckless impulse, whereas Adrian represented the true emotional and structural threat, the man she was willing to risk stability for, the man she was funding, meeting, whispering promises to, and perhaps planning a full separation around. The thought hardened Marcus's resolve as he prepared a deeper infiltration plan, this time targeting Adrian's condo, not physically, but through the wireless router he accessed, using a simple handshake capture while parked 3 buildings away, allowing him into the condo's smart home system, where he accessed camera logs, motion sensors, and even audio snippets captured by the voice assistant, discovering that Leela had been there not once or twice, but at least 11 separate times in the past month, her visits lasting anywhere from 20 minutes to nearly 3 hours. And as Marcus sat in his dark office reviewing the clips, he felt a quiet transformation solidifying within him, a shift from discovery to strategy, from strategy to intention, because now he wasn't just collecting proof, he was preparing for the moment. He would step out of the shadows and force Lila and Adrian into the light, where every lie they thought was hidden would become the blade he used to dismantle their world. Marcus woke with a sense of sharpened purpose, the kind that came not from anger, but from the clarity of knowing exactly what needed to be done next. And as he sat at his desk reviewing the surveillance logs from the past week, he realized that the time for merely observing had passed now. He needed proximity, leverage, and a controlled environment in which to unravel the truth directly from its source. He began by preparing a new layer of infiltration, crafting a false identity complete with a digital footprint deep enough to withstand scrutiny, using the pseudonym Daniel Cross, a consulting specialist whose experience aligned perfectly with a job posting at Adrian's firm. Posting, Marcus suspected, was created recently due to expansion plans funded partly by Lila's concealed contributions, and within hours he had generated employment history, social media profiles, tax documents, and even old photos created with AI aging filters to create the illusion of a decade-long professional trajectory. And when he submitted the application, he knew the credentials would be irresistible to Adrian, who always appeared in need of competent staff but had limited resources to search widely. True to prediction, Adrian responded within the hour, requesting an interview the next morning at a downtown cafe. And as Marcus prepared his disguise, slightly different hairstyle, tinted glasses, trimmed beard, he practiced controlling the small facial cues and vocal tonalities that might betray recognition, ensuring his persona was believable and distinct from the Marcus Lila knew. Because this interview wasn't just about accessing Adrian's professional environment. It was about observing him up close, reading his micro-expressions, and identifying any weaknesses lurking behind the polished charm he displayed in public. When Marcus arrived at the cafe the next day, he spotted Adrian's instantly confident posture, tailored blazer, an air of easy social control, and, as Marcus approached, he kept his voice calm and slightly lower than usual, shaking Adrian's hand firmly and studying the man's eyes for any flicker of recognition. Finding none, the two sat outside, surrounded by mid-morning city bustle, and Adrian launched into a comfortable conversation about his business, explaining expansion plans, client challenges, and upcoming ventures, unaware that the man he was speaking to was the husband of the woman he believed he had successfully hidden from the world. And Marcus watched him closely, noting how often he used vague business terms to obscure financial gaps, how he avoided mentioning personal life entirely, and how he leaned forward when discussing plans that required long-term commitment plans. Lila clearly believed herself part of. As the interview progressed, Marcus strategically steered the conversation toward operational weaknesses, offering insights that impressed Adrian enough for him to reveal subtle frustrations, including a comment slipped unintentionally about someone who was helping him secure funding, a statement that made Marcus's pulse slow with cold focus, because, although Adrian didn't say Lila's name, his tone carried the weight of emotional entanglement and reliance, confirming the depth of their connection. After the meeting, which ended with Adrian expressing strong interest in bringing Daniel on board, Marcus returned to his car and exhaled slowly, feeling the threshold of his plan shift into a new phase. Infiltration had succeeded, and now he had access not just to Adrian's digital world, but his physical one, the conversations he held, the vulnerabilities he revealed unknowingly, and the blind spots he never imagined someone was mapping. Yet the day's revelations didn't end there. When Marcus returned home that afternoon, he found Lila already inside, earlier than usual, pacing the living room with a tense expression that suggested emotional conflict. And when she turned toward him, her face softened into a fragile smile that didn't reach her eyes, as though she sensed some invisible tension in their home but couldn't identify its source. And she approached him with a gentle touch on his arm, asking if he wanted dinner or maybe a walk to clear her head, a gesture that Marcus found strangely rehearsed, as though she was attempting to maintain the illusion of their marriage while carrying the weight of her deception. He played along, responding with calm affection, masking the calculation simmering behind his eyes. And as they sat together on the couch later, watching a show neither of them actually paid attention to, Marcus studied her subtle behaviors, the way she checked her phone every few minutes, the way she typed messages quickly and then deleted the thread, the way her breathing changed after each alert, as if she were carrying two lives simultaneously and trying to prevent them from colliding. But what Lila didn't know was that the messages she deleted appeared instantly on Marcus's mirrored feed upstairs, including one she sent to Adrian late that night. "I need to talk soon. Something feels off at home." The moment Marcus read it, he understood two things with chilling clarity. Leela's intuition was awakening, and the window for silent observation was closing, meaning the next phase of his plan, exposure, confrontation, and unraveling, had to begin before she fully sensed the truth he already possessed. Ethan stood frozen in the dim light of the abandoned storage unit, his pulse thundering in his ears as he replayed the voicemail that had pulled him here, an unfamiliar voice, low and urgent, telling him he needed to know the truth before the FedEx man disappeared forever. A message that felt like a threat, a warning, and a clue wrapped into a single breath. Now, as he swept his flashlight across shelves of dusty boxes, he felt the creeping certainty that he was walking deeper into a trap set long before he even found the video of his wife's betrayal. He forced himself to focus, reminding his trembling hands that he wasn't here blindly. He had traced the keycard found in the delivery man's abandoned locker, a keycard marked with the same warehouse number where two women had already reported mysterious break-in. And as he stepped toward the only metal crate in the room large enough to hide something worth killing over, he heard a faint metallic rattle that made the hair on the back of his neck rise. Ethan approached slowly, gripping the crowbar he had brought just in case, and as he jammed it into the crate's seam and forced it open, he recoiled when he discovered not weapons, not drugs, not corpses, but stacks of external hard drives labeled with handwritten flight states that matched every delivery route the FedEx guy had worked. His mind raced as he pulled one out and connected it to the small rugged tablet he carried for his investigations, expecting mundane footage of streets or houses, only to feel his stomach twist when he found dozens of encrypted video folders, each titled with women's initials and addresses hinting at a pattern far darker than a simple affair. Before he could open any of them, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway, heavy and slow, too deliberate to be accidental, and Ethan instantly shut the tablet, killed the flashlight, and crouched behind a stack of crates, pressing his back against the metal as adrenaline surged through him. The footsteps stopped directly outside the unit, and for several seconds only, silence hovered between them, thick and suffocating. Then someone slid a key into the lock. Ethan held his breath as the door creaked open and a silhouette filled the entrance. Tall and broad-shouldered, the outline unmistakably was the FedEx man, except something about him was off in a way Ethan couldn't quite define, as if the calmness in his stance was too calculated, too rehearsed. The man stepped inside, closed the door behind him with a soft, metallic click, and said into the darkness, "I know you're here, Ethan. You should have left it alone," his voice disturbingly steady, lacking even a hint of panic, despite being confronted with the person whose life he had just torn apart. Ethan glanced at the exits and realized there was no way out without being seen. So he remained silent, hoping the darkness hid him well enough. But the man continued walking forward, his hand brushing lightly over the crates, as if he knew the exact position of every object in the room. A movement that made Ethan understand the terrifying possibility that this wasn't the first time. The FedEx man had met someone. Here this was a hunting ground he knew intimately. When the man reached the opened crate, he froze, then let out a soft sigh, not of fear, but of disappointment. "You weren't supposed to find this," he muttered, and Ethan felt a sudden cold wave wash over him as the man knelt and touched the hard drives with a kind of reverence. whispering something Ethan couldn't fully hear, but caught fragments of words like patterns, control, and obedience, phrases that didn't match an affair, but something ritualistic, obsessive, and deeply criminal. Ethan knew he had to move now, before he was discovered. So he reached into his pocket and clicked the silent alarm trigger connected to his car, hoping it would send the emergency ping to Detective Mara like they had arranged. But the slight vibration of the button must have shifted his footing, because the crate beside him rattled softly and the man's head snapped toward the sound with terrifying precision. "There you are," he said quietly, and before Ethan could run, the man lunged with speed that didn't seem human, grabbing Ethan by the jacket and slamming him against the metal wall so hard stars burst across his vision. "You shouldn't have watched that video," he whispered, his fingers tightening around Ethan's throat. "And neither should your wife have opened the door that day." Ethan clawed at his grip, gasping, but just as the edges of his vision began to fade, the distant wail of sirens pierced the night. Detective Mara was coming. The FedEx man's expression shifted, not to fear, but to something far worse, irritation. "You brought the cops," he hissed, and Ethan sensed his rage simmering into something explosive. But before the man could finish what he started, the warehouse lights flickered on with a violent hum, flooding the room with blinding brightness and revealing his face no longer calm, no longer collected, but twisted with fury and desperation. A face that told Ethan he had just crossed a line that would change everything. The sudden flood of white light seared through Ethan's eyes as he struggled to stay conscious. His back pressed weakly against the cold steel wall, while the FedEx man tightened his grip only long enough to make a point before the approaching sirens forced him to release and step back with a frustrated snarl. His eyes darting around the warehouse like a cornered predator calculating escape routes. Ethan collapsed to his knees, coughing, clutching at his bruised throat. But he forced himself to rise, because he knew the man wouldn't run blindly. He would have a plan, one designed long before Ethan ever discovered the incriminating video that had sparked this nightmare. And the realization chilled him, because nothing happening now felt improvised. The FedEx man leaned down, his voice low and venomous. "You think the police are here to save you? They're here because I want them here." A statement that made Ethan's stomach clamp with dread just as the warehouse doors slammed open and Detective Mara stormed in with 2 officers, their weapons raised and flashlights slicing through the brightness as they yelled commands for the suspect to get on the ground. Instead of surrendering, the man lifted his hands, slowly, not in compliance, but in a taunting, almost theatrical gesture, before stepping behind a stack of crates with a practiced efficiency that instantly made Mara shout for her team to spread out and flank the aisles. Ethan staggered forward, shouting hoarsely that the suspect wasn't trying to escape but leading them somewhere. But his voice cracked and faded, drowned by echoing footsteps and the metallic thuds of officers moving through the maze-like storage space. Mara rushed to him, gripping his shoulders firmly, scanning his swollen throat with worry, before whispering urgently, "Tell me what he said. Why would he want the cops here?" Ethan struggled to form the words, but the only explanation he could muster was that the man was protecting something else, something more important than his own freedom. And the hard drives suddenly flashed in his memory like exploding sparks. Mara's expression stiffened, and she immediately called out to her team to locate and secure the evidence crate. But before they could take a single step, every light in the warehouse abruptly flickered and died with a violent pop, plunging the building into total darkness except for the thin beams of police flashlights that now seemed hopelessly weak. Ethan's breath caught as a mechanical hum echoed from above, something heavy shifting on the warehouse's ceiling rails, and then a metallic crash erupted from the far corner, followed by a scream that was cut off too quickly to be anything but horrifying. One of the officers swung his flashlight toward the sound and shouted for backup, but his beam only illuminated a wall of dust swirling where a suspended crate had fallen from overhead, deliberately dropped to separate the group and block one of the exits. Ethan felt Mara pull him close protectively, her gun raised, her voice tight as she called out the suspect's name, demanding he surrender. But the only response was a low chuckle echoing from the shadows, a sound that bounced in every direction until it felt like the walls themselves were laughing. Flashlights flicked wildly as officers tried to pinpoint the source, but the suspect moved silently, almost fluidly, darting between aisles with unnerving speed that made Ethan question how long he had been planning this moment, orchestrating it like a conductor leading a symphony of fear. Then, without warning, a blinding red emergency strip light snapped on along the floor, casting the warehouse in a hellish glow and revealing the delivery man standing atop a metal storage platform above them, one hand gripping a railing, the other pointing to the crate filled with hard drives below as he shouted, "You're too late. Those files don't expose me. They expose all of you." His voice boomed with manic triumph, and Mara instantly fired a warning shot, ordering him to get down. But he only smirked and kicked a lever beside him. A motor roared to life overhead, and Ethan watched in horror as the massive ventilation fans began spinning, pulling loose papers, dust, and debris into a violent cyclone. Then he saw what the man intended. The fans weren't just creating chaos, they were meant to destroy evidence. Mara realized it too, and screamed for the officers to unplug the power boxes. But the nearest switch was on the other side of the fallen crate. Ethan didn't think, he just ran, ignoring the pain in his throat and the ache in his legs, diving behind the toppled metal container and crawling toward the junction panel while the fans howled louder, shredding the edges of files and ripping labels from the hard drives. Above him, the FedEx man laughed again, the sound warped by the rushing air, shouting, "You wanted the truth? Then watch what the truth costs." And Ethan, shaking, bleeding, terrified, slammed his fist against the power kill switch just as the fans reached full speed, praying it would be enough to stop everything from spiraling into irreversible destruction. The sudden silence after Marcus slammed the power switch left the warehouse suspended in a tense, uneasy calm. Dust still swirling in muted eddies as officers and Ethan cautiously adjusted to the darkness that no longer roared with spinning fans. And the FedEx man froze mid-motion, his hands gripping the railing above, eyes wide for the first time with something that almost resembled shock. Marcus had arrived just in time, having used the rooftop access to slide down a fire escape and maneuver behind the man without making a sound. Every calculated step placing him in the perfect position to observe without being seen. And now, as he crouched low behind a row of crates. He could see the intricate tension of the man's body, the way his muscles tensed for a fight he hadn't anticipated, and the sudden awareness that his carefully rehearsed chaos might no longer protect him from a new player in the game. Ethan, still gasping and clutching his throat, followed Mara's instructions to stay low while officers advanced, flashlights cutting through the shadows in uncoordinated arcs. And Marcus realized he had only one chance to prevent the FedEx man from escaping entirely and destroying the crates of evidence that would expose not only his crimes but the web of manipulations tied to Lila and Adrian. Silently, he activated the remote locking mechanism he had installed on the main warehouse doors days earlier, engineered to respond to a subtle wireless signal he carried, and instantly the heavy doors groaned and slammed shut, trapping the suspect in place. And for the first time, the man's cool, deliberate composure cracked into something more primal: panic. The FedEx man hissed, "You can't. This isn't over. You don't understand what's at stake." But Marcus ignored him, focusing instead on the hard drives lying in the fallen crate below and the neat stacks still undisturbed on the shelves, each one a potential weapon or revelation. He motioned to Mara and Ethan to maintain cover as he moved forward with precise, silent steps, adrenaline sharpening his awareness. And as he drew nearer, he could hear the subtle tremor in the man's voice, a telltale sign of fear layered over confidence. And Marcus realized that no matter how methodical the suspect had been, he hadn't accounted for someone with patience, planning, and intimate knowledge of both the digital and physical terrain. As Marcus stepped into a shaft of pale emergency light, he drew the FedEx man's attention for the first time, locking eyes with him without speaking. And the effect was immediate, and perhaps deception, but Marcus remained still, a quiet predator, and simply observed, reading every micro-expression, every micro-shift of weight, every twitch of hand or foot. Mara and Ethan, watching from behind crates, felt the tension radiate outward like heat from a flame, and Marcus spoke finally, a calm, deliberate voice cutting through the charged silence. "It's over. Step down and tell me everything." The FedEx man froze again, shaking his head subtly as if the words alone were not enough to convince him of the sudden shift in control. And Marcus advanced slowly, confident, his eyes never leaving the suspects, while Mara and her officers flanked strategically, lights illuminating corners that had once hidden traps, wires, and deadly equipment. Then, in a sudden, fluid movement, the man gestured to a small console near the wall, where a hidden compartment contained a backup set of drives and documents, almost as if he had been preparing for the moment he would be forced to surrender. But even this act carried arrogance, because he hadn't anticipated Marcus would already know of it. Marcus moved decisively, grabbing the drives and flipping the console open, exposing every layer of deception: records of payments, surveillance of multiple homes, encrypted video files, contracts, and even documents linking Lila and Adrian to a broader network of manipulation. The FedEx man's eyes flickered, and in that instant Marcus understood the scope. This was never a simple affair, never a single betrayal, but a complex web of obsession, greed, and emotional control. And now, standing above him with calm authority, Marcus felt the first surge of true clarity since discovering the initial video. He had not only caught the man responsible for violating his home, his marriage, and the lives of others. He had gained full knowledge of the architecture behind every lie, every manipulation. Every secret hand in that knowledge lay his ultimate power to reclaim the truth, to expose deception fully, and to finally decide the fate of the people who had so casually constructed a world without him. Knowing that the next steps confronting Leela, confronting Adrian, and dismantling the FedEx man's empire of secrets would be executed with precision and absolute control. Because Marcus now held the ultimate leverage, unshakable awareness of every betrayal, every hidden movement, and every truth that had been obscured in shadow. Marcus stood over the FedEx man as the tension in the warehouse reached a peak, the dust settling slowly around scattered crates and hard drives, while Detective Mara and Ethan kept their positions, guns drawn but ready to step back at his signal. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Marcus felt the full weight of control in his hands. The culmination of every hour, every plan, every calculated observation that had led him to this precise moment. The man's face was pale, eyes darting with the realization that the chaos he had meticulously orchestrated could no longer protect him. And Marcus spoke clearly, deliberately, each word heavy with authority. It ends here. No more games, no more lies, no more destruction. And the FedEx man's lips twisted into a bitter smile, a flicker of defiance flashing in his eyes before giving way to exhaustion. The facade of invincibility finally crumbling. With careful precision, Marcus moved toward him, retrieving the drives and stacking them methodically, scanning the labels, verifying times, and confirming the network of manipulation, extortion, and betrayal that had intertwined Lila, Adrian, and the delivery man. Understanding that these files were more than evidence, they were the blueprint of deception itself. He handed the drives to Mara, who immediately secured them in evidence bags, and as the officers cuffed the FedEx man, he muttered under his breath, "You'll regret this. You'll see how deep it goes." But Marcus ignored the threat, his mind already moving to the next steps, confronting Adrian with the knowledge he had gained, facing Leela with undeniable proof of her betrayal, and dismantling every lie they had built. Because while the delivery man had been the instrument of chaos, the architects were still very much alive. Later, as they escorted the suspect out, Ethan finally breathed fully, shoulders slumping in relief, and Marcus allowed himself a moment to reflect on the layers of deception, the cunning, and the audacity it had taken for Leela and Adrian to construct their secret life. And yet he also recognized the strength he had discovered within himself, the patience to wait, the clarity to observe, and the precision to act at exactly the right moment. That same night, Marcus returned home to find Leela sitting on the couch, phone in hand, her expression soft, tentative, but carrying an undertone of unease, as if she sensed the culmination of events he had orchestrated and the inevitability of confrontation. And he sat down calmly beside her, the evidence now fully in his possession, knowing there would be no arguing, no excuses, only truths laid bare. He began with Adrian first, using the traced contacts, financial records, and physical tracking evidence to confront him directly, arranging a meeting under the guise of reconciliation that quickly turned into a confrontation where every hidden action, every secret transfer of funds, and every betrayal was methodically revealed. Adrian's facade cracked instantly, panic overtaking arrogance. Realizing that the web he had woven was no match for Marcus's careful strategy, and as he stammered, trying to justify the affair, the manipulation, and the financial deceit, Marcus held up the hard drives, each one a silent testament to the depth of their deception. With Adrian's defeat secured, Marcus turned fully toward Leela, laying out the sequence of her betrayals, the meetings, the texts, the funding, and the patterns that had been observed. The GPS trackers, the mirrored phone feeds, the careful reconstruction of her secret life, all meticulously documented, and as Leela's eyes widened with shock and guilt, Marcus maintained his calm, cold authority, knowing that no pleading, no attempt at explanation could undo the consequences of the choices she had made. He finally said, "You built a world without me. I am here to reclaim mine." And in that moment, Lila understood that every lie, every omission, every secret had been exposed, and that Marcus's patience, observation, and relentless pursuit of truth had completely dismantled the illusions she believed would remain hidden forever. The story concluded not with vengeance, but with clarity. As Marcus now possessed control over his own life, the evidence secured, the conspirators held accountable, and the knowledge that while betrayal had once entered his home like a shadow, precision, patience, and courage had turned the shadow into something manageable, something conquerable. And as he looked at Mara and Ethan later that evening, the weight of the ordeal settling in, he allowed himself a single deep breath of relief, knowing that the truth had won. And in the quiet aftermath of calculated chaos, Marcus finally reclaimed the life that had been threatened, piece by piece, exposing every secret and reclaiming every moment stolen by deception.